On page 74 of We Never Went to the Moon, Bill Kaysing writes, "During a show on KOME, a radio expert said that he believed my story since all transmissions to and from the astronauts were made at the gigahertz level. All transmissions to and from the astronauts were made at the gigahertz level, thus making it impossible for hams or anyone else to verify any broadcasts." According to the Apollo 11 press kit, the spacecraft transmitted its signals at 2 GHz. The frequencies used by ham operators can easily be looked up on the internet, and the 2 GHz used by Apollo simply doesn't exist in that category.
I would like to pause and take a moment to thank Jarrah for single-handedly debunking Kaysing's supposed radio expert, who said that all transmissions to and from the astronauts were done at the gigahertz level, thus making it impossible for hams or anyone else to verify any broadcasts. Shortly after Jarrah read that excerpt from Kaysing's Conspiracist Bible, he then provides evidence that not only do ham radio operators use gigahertz frequencies, completely destroying what Kaysing or his expert said, but also that hams are allowed to dance all around 2 GHz.
This confirms what Kaysing's radio expert had said. Apollo used a frequency not used by radio hams. Apollo used a frequency not used by radio hams. This ultimately invalidates them as independent verification for the moon landings.
Apollo used a frequency not used by radio hams. Okay. First off, what does 2 GHz mean? Is it the same as 2000.0 MHz? No. As any 6th grade graduate can tell you, the number of significant digits used to represent a number tells you something about how precise the number is. For example, 2 GHz or 2000 MHz, both with only one significant digit, implies a range of 1.5 to 2.5 GHz. On the other hand, 2300 MHz with 2 significant digits would imply a range of 2250 to 2350 MHz, which is also in the 2 GHz range, while a number like 2287.5 MHz with 5 significant digits implies a range of 2287.45 to 2287.55 MHz, and is in both the 2300 MHz and 2 GHz ranges. And 2000.0 MHz, with a 0 to the right of the decimal point, also has 5 significant digits. Second, the AI-80 Piedmont website that Jarrah found is a very simple list of frequencies that amateur radio operators are permitted to transmit on. It's not by any means a complete list, nor does it give the licensing requirements, transmission mode, or maximum power limits that are allowed on various sections of these bands, such as found in this chart from the National Association for Amateur Radio. But neither chart is a list of frequencies that ham radio operators are permitted to receive on. To prove this point, you might notice that among the many frequency bands that are missing on the AI-80 chart is the band from 520 kHz to 1610 kHz, which would fit on this chart between the low frequency and medium frequency bands. Also missing is the band from 87.5 MHz to 108.0 MHz, which would fit on this chart between the 2 meter and 6 meter bands. These frequency ranges are missing from the chart because amateurs cannot legally transmit on them. Yet, every ham and non-ham alike probably has at least one radio in his or her car or home that receives signals on those frequencies, which are better known as the AM and FM bands. No licensing is required to just listen, implying that hams could not listen to a 2 GHz signal simply because they aren't allowed to transmit on that frequency is the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Third, this drawing from the Apollo 11 press kit identifies the 2 GHz steerable S-band antenna, not the radio itself. Think about what Jarrah is implying from a practical standpoint. Have you ever picked up 2 different stations at the same time on one frequency with your car radio? You probably couldn't make out either station, right? Well, imagine then if on Apollo there were radio transmissions coming from the command module, the lunar module, the rover, and all that radio traffic was on a single frequency. That would be one booked up channel, wouldn't it? And the antenna was used to both transmit and receive. So you've got traffic from the tracking stations to deal with as well. How could they keep the signals from 4 different sources from clobbering one another? They couldn't. Later, Jarrah tells us that even the stupid Soviets were smart enough to use separate uplink and downlink frequencies to communicate with their spacecraft. So why wouldn't Apollo use different frequencies for each individual source, which is called full duplex mode? This press kit drawing is similar to a drawing on page 56 of the telecommunications section of the Apollo Operations Handbook. Here, the antenna is labeled as a 2 kilomegacycle antenna. That's a 60s radio engineer's way of saying 2,000 megacycles, or 2 gigahertz. Meanwhile, on page 17 of that same document, we find a block diagram of the data radio system, which specifies the uplink frequency and the primary and secondary downlink frequencies for the command module. Notice, none of these signals are at exactly 2 gigahertz. The actual frequencies used by Apollo are all over the internet. In fact, Jarrah actually had to search hard to find one of the few references that didn't give the exact frequencies. NASA's white paper on the Apollo Unified S-band system has a complete description of the system characteristics for both the ground stations and the spacecraft. The communications broke down like this. The uplink to the command module was 2106.4 MHz and provided voice, data, and range codes. The uplink to the lunar module was 2101.8 MHz and provided voice and data. This channel was also used to send messages to the S-4B, the third stage rocket, and voice and camera commands to the lunar rover. The command module downlink was on 2287.5 MHz, providing voice, data, and range codes. When the command module was behind the moon, voice and telemetry data was recorded and played back on 2272.5 MHz when the Earth was in sight. The lunar module downlink was on 2282.5 MHz and provided voice, data, and the TV signal. The rover downlink was on 2265.5 MHz and provided voice, EVA data, and the TV signal. These frequencies are all in the 2 GHz range, and the downlinks are all in the 2300 MHz range. So much for Casing's radio expert, who said simply that Apollo signals were at the gigahertz level, preventing hams or anyone else from listening in. Jarrah showed us that hams do use the gigahertz frequencies, and they do use frequencies near where the Apollo radio was actually operated at. In fact, the equipment used by hams to communicate over the 13 centimeter band probably wouldn't even need to be detuned to listen to frequencies just below 2300 MHz. As with all the other unnamed experts that Casing quotes in his Conspiracist Bible, this expert obviously didn't know anything about his area of expertise. Casing's fabricated experts are called proof surrogates, and using them to support his claims is called the false attribution fallacy, which Casing apparently used extensively throughout his book. So, at the end of the day, we find that the Apollo spacecraft transmitted on various frequencies in the 13 centimeter band, which are in both the 2300 MHz range and the 2 GHz range, and just below a band of frequencies allocated for amateur radio operation. I consider this claim as Jarrah's most significant fallacy, as most of the remaining claims that he makes regarding telecommunications are based on the premise that the Apollo radios all operated at exactly 2 GHz. We could stop here and call it a day. But what would be the fun in doing that? Ciao, moon hoax conspirators, wherever you are.